While you are watching this video on composition, I encourage you to take notes in your sketchbook. Feel free to pause the video at any point to write anything down that stands out to you. I do want to see a few notes that will help you remember each rule as we talk about the rules that make a strong composition. There are 5 of them. So to start, composition is the arrangement of visual elements. So basically where everything goes. So where everything is. Composition determines where your subject is, where the angles are, where the focus is. And the reason we really care about this is because you can help the viewer see your point that you are wanting them to get. It can affect the mood. It can help people understand it easier, and it can make it more exciting to look at. So those are a few reasons why we care about composition. The first rule is the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is where you divide your paper into thirds both vertically and horizontally. As you do that, you create areas of intersection. These areas of intersection are the ideal locations for your focal point. A focal point being the main focus of the image, a face, the most interesting part of the image where you want your viewer to look first. If you choose one of these, that is the most ideal place for you to put your focal point. If you look down, we have 2 examples with a face. We have this image here, as well as this one here. Both of those uses a face for the focal point. This one works a little bit better compositionally. The face is where the focal point is, but the rest of the body is kind of zoomed in and cropped, so it doesn't feel like this body is centered. When we look at this one, yes, our focal point is on the rule of thirds, but the body still feels very centered. You never want something right in the middle of your page, unless, of course, you have a very valid reason to do that. There are exceptions to every rule, but you have to have a reason to break them. This middle image here, this landscape, this might be a painter's easel, a chair, a person, I don't know what this is, but this is also happening where one of those intersections occurs. Rule number 2 is balance. We did talk about this when we did Principles of Design. Balance is basically visual weight, having to feel like it is balanced and things aren't going to fall over. So here we have an example of a teeter-totter or a seesaw. We have a darker, larger, heavier visual weight, and we have a lighter, smaller, softer visual weight over here. They can balance each other out by putting the larger weight closer to the center, the smaller weight farther to the outside. A good example is these 2 images here. Here we have it properly balanced. Your large, visually heavy tree with the person sitting underneath it is closer to the center, and your smaller, lightweight, visually, city off in the distance is off to the side. This image feels very unbalanced. You would need a few more things to really help it feel balanced. It would be a lot more work to get this image to feel natural. Number 3, no tangents. You want to use overlapping. So a tangent, you'll see these little circles in this image. A tangent is where things just barely touch the edges, and that includes the edges of your paper. So right here, the elbow is touching the edge of the paper. Her head is touching the line of the door frame. The elbow is almost touching the wrist. It's close enough that we'll call it a tangent. His head is touching the line of the ceiling. The reason we don't like tangents, your brain will flatten the image. So right here where we see her head touching the door frame, when we see that, our brain automatically flattens the image, and instead of feeling like we have people in a room with a back wall, with a space through there, through the door, your brain will flatten the entire image. So you can have the most realistic shading, the best perspective, everything you can do to make this image look 3D, but if you have a tangent, it will flatten it. So you really want to avoid tangents, including with the edge of the paper. A better option would be to have them overlap. Overlapping gives your image the feeling of depth and helps you avoid those awkward tangents. Rule number 4 is cropping. Cropping is great. You get to draw less and it makes your picture better. So here you can see in this image, we haven't drawn the top of his head or his butt. And the image works really well. We see this giant talking to a little person. Most of us, when we look at this image, will see a giant talking to a little person rather than a normal sized person talking to a small person. The reason we feel that way is because this person in this tiny, tiny position is so big they don't fit in the image. So that tricks our brain into saying, oh, yep, he's a giant. So cropping can really add interest to your piece. Over here we have maybe Zorro going to go save a city. We didn't draw the bottom of his cape or his feet. And he feels a little more epic and has a little more presence because he takes up so much space he doesn't fit. So cropping is great. It can also be a really good tool to increase your balance. Usually when things are so large they don't fit on the paper, it makes having a balanced composition very easy because you just need a couple little things to kind of finish it out. When you do crop, a couple things to consider. If it's a face, you want to give it a little bit of space in front of the face. It's called breathing room. And if something is moving, you want to give it space to move, so leave a little space in front of it. So when you're cropping, make sure you consider those things. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. Our last rule is choosing diagonals. We have 3 images here, one with horizontal lines, one with vertical lines, and one with lots and lots of diagonal lines. Your viewers are going to be drawn to the more exciting, the more active pieces. This is a great example. We have diagonal paths going back in space. We have a diagonal cape, diagonal spirit wolf or whatever. His head's coming in at a diagonal. We've got the hills. This isn't just one diagonal line. This is almost everything in here is diagonal. This is dynamic. It has movement, tension. This is what people are going to look at. Now there are times and places for these types of images. Horizontal lines are very calm. They're very stable. This type of thing you would have in a very relaxing space. You'll see a lot of these kind of images in doctor's offices where they want you to be calm. You'll notice there's a diagonal line up here on the roof. So this, we're looking for the majority of the lines, and this one are horizontal. Those 2 little diagonal lines don't count as following this rule. Vertical, there's a time and place for vertical as well. These imply energy, growth, a little more stability. There are times and places for images that use the majority of vertical lines. If you don't have a reason to do horizontal or vertical, I encourage you to stick with diagonal, unless of course you have a reason to. A good example of how these look more dynamic. Down here we have a runner who's really only slightly in a different position. But this is more like how I think I run, and here's how I actually run. This person's clearly moving faster. We've got diagonal lines in the background as well as the whole body is at that angle. Here we're very upright. We've got our vertical and horizontal lines, and it's a lot calmer.